ownership of them himself, and not feel challenged or threatened, and not feel like he's going to lose power within the organization. Show him a way. Here are these things that you can do that are actually going to make you more powerful or more profitable. Now, you're not always going to be successful because it is a threat to someone if they want to push power down in the organization. And you can be wrong. What if he recommends, oh, you need to let the accountant here make more decisions? Maybe this guy's got a history of making really bad decisions. People kind of know, even though he's got an idiot. You're going to lose your credibility if you do that. So that's another aspect of your credibility is expertise. Actually, you go in as a consultant, you are looked to as the expert, and you have to sort of maintain that expertise. Even when you feel very, as I have at different times, sort of very green, like MBA young person who doesn't have as much, let's say, industry experience as the people I'm sitting across from who've been doing this their entire life, but they still look to you as the expert. So you need to be prepared and you need to know your stuff.
Especially if you're white.
Yeah, I mean, for me, people will come at you. I've had this in China too, and ask like, we were working on this lemon project in China, and these guys ask me like, what's the per hectare yield of lemons in the U.S.? I'm like, dude, I'm here to look at hotels. I have no idea. And so, yeah, people really look at you and want you to be able to know those things. Yeah, exactly. I can look it up.
Well, can I bounce off this comment, right? I think being, well, in quote, white or from another region in Africa, it can work in two ways. People actually would respect you for that. Because you kind of bring it's obvious that you bring an exotic view of things, right? So it's just balancing relationship. If you make people like you, they would easily probably they respect you more because they tend to know that you have different experiences that they have. So
yeah.
Do we think?
I think you're exactly right. It's kind of leading me right back into all this. Like I said, my number one topic here is FaceTime and building relationships in all of our lab projects. The relationship is often more important than the business matter at hand. Again, that's not to undermine your expertise, because those are sort of equally important, the relationship and the expertise at hand there. And this is important too, especially as a consultant. And we tell all of our lab teams this: all of your relationships are horizontal. As a consultant, you can go in and talk directly with the CEO, any line manager. You can also hang out with the security guards and the drivers. You don't necessarily have a boss other than the person who hired you, which maybe the CEO, it may be some funder, back in the West, and that gets weird. Believe me. Who's paying? A lot of times, if you're doing development work too, it's not your direct sort of across the table client that's paying for this stuff, and so you really have to be mindful of the relationship if they haven't really been paying for it. But you need to spend the face time with your key contacts and really anyone who's willing, right, to build those relationships at all levels. You have no formal power, right? So you are sort of relationship influence dependent, expertise. People believe in your expertise. They believe you're powerful. They believe, let's say, the boss supports you. They believe that you're working in earnest, right? That you really are working for their benefit. And they can bring in something to the table. If you lose any one of those aspects, you can really start to get sort of shut out of things pretty quickly. You may not even know it. You just maybe notice that you're not being asked to do as much. You've been sort of pushed out. That eventually happened to me in that Millennium Village thing, which was, I don't really think a fault of mine, but I had a falling out with the head of the organization. And so, anyway, that'd be a whole other session, Millennium Village. The other thing about that, though, is that especially in these high context and sort of data poor environments, information falls out from all levels of the organization. And it falls out like over relationships, not just like an interview, not just sitting down and going through questions. So spending that time with people. Some of my most productive time with people in organizations, long car rides or multi-day trips, right? Where you've got just hours to sort of talk about anything under the sun. You're stuck in the Forerunner or whatever it is. Hopefully it is. Or you're not in the bush taxi like my Peace Corps time. But it gives you just a chance to range over everything. I've gotten some of my best sort of pictures of organizations by doing that. I will tell some stories from my Ethiopian time. but I was months into my assignment there before some of my closest friends thought to mention that the entire staff of the office, the entire country staff, and this is a major international organization, Millennium Villages Project, the entire Ethiopian staff was in some way or the other related to the project head. And it was like, no one even thought to mention that to me before, and I was just, shocked, a little bit shocked, not completely surprised given the dysfunction I'd already seen. But it was kind of like the project's dirty little secret that everyone kind of knew, but no one had thought to tell like the outsider until I built up relationships with some people who were really my close friends and started getting to know them and understanding their frustrations with the organization. And that really helped me sort of paint that picture of that organization. That was a wild one.
Speaking of data, is knowledge power there? Here it always has been, and they're trying to change it with business information systems and all that, but is that part of what you're up against, that everything is very closely held because that's power, that's territory, or do they share, if you ask?
Yeah, I totally misinterpreted what you said for the first 50% of what you were
Oh.
talking. I was not seeing her going. I was not seeing her going there with that.
I think so. Of course, it depends on the organization. But a lot of times, if you have, people gonna hoard information. Absolutely.
Okay.
And people do it in other places too. Yeah, people really hoard information, especially if organizational cultures turn negative. You're sort of just waiting out and holding things over other people's heads so that like you can prove them wrong when the time comes, instead of working collaboratively.
I don't really feel like it's hoarding as much as like that person feels like they're responsible to know everything, and maybe people are just not asking whether or not they'll share it. Do you know what I mean? You think it's an intentional like
I think
holding?
that's because, I don't know, from where I come from, you want to be the best in everything you do. You want to dominate everybody. You want to look good. So when you have knowledge,
That's power.
Is that where it comes from?
yeah. So if you can hold on to data information to have a good edge.
Yeah, but I don't know that it's true for every experience I've had in Africa. But also I was I agree. But I was gonna say earlier, we were in Kenya last summer for the summer, and when we went to GE, we talked to like the CFO and like the head of marketing and all these like the leaders of their different departments, and they were talking about gathering market data and talking about how difficult it was. And what they ended up doing is they would find not companies and not like consultants or anything, but just people like in the city that were like like the head or like most like famous person in that like group, whatever they were trying to figure out. And they would go to those people and they would go door to door and talk to people, and it was like performing your market research all on your own essentially. And they said that they had paid, I know Sophia is going crazy, isn't he? He like landed on my eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and they said they'd spent like a whole bunch of GE, so I'm sure it was more than I even know, but a whole bunch of money trying to get like paying for people to do market data for them, and it all turned out to be false, and so they just started doing it their own. Yeah. I don't know, do you guys, I was gonna ask the Africans earlier, or people that have been there, I feel like it could be like a really good opportunity in Africa to start doing some kind of legit market research. We just take money from Africa.
We could create Wilson and
Who's
there.
Who, what?
Gallup.
Gallup.
They're pretty much there doing that.
IBM
But
has some stuff over there.
Yeah, but I mean, are they getting accurate information? I feel like that's the problem, right? Is that people, like, you were talking about the teacher guy earlier, and he's like, oh yeah, I got this grant. Yeah, I'm gonna be
Margin of error.
I know, 25%.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, like this.
going to talk about health, for instance, because in Ghana Health Service now, looking at mobility and mortality trends, we tend to use just the capital cities because you're unable to go into the districts, so you tend to make a generalization about the whole country when in fact it's just the sample size is not representative at all. So I can see where that's probably also coming from. Yeah.
I think I've also seen that there's such a dramatic rural-urban migration that you can't count people because they're moving so often.
Yeah.
especially East Africa, where no one's registered. You have no idea what businesses are up and running, which aren't. They're up one day, they're down the next. They just decided to own a computer shop, and now tomorrow they're so on or so on. Yeah. And I was also going to say regarding the information from the other side, I've been taken to the cleaners because I had the inability to hold my information in the appropriate way. I let just a little thing slide that I didn't know was going to be a big deal and lost millions of dollars. So I think that it goes the other way as well. You think, well, he might be holding information from me, but also I had to constantly be thinking, what should I be holding from this president, this vice president, from the top to the taxi driver that's on the payroll, of the guy that's buying the land that you're going to need to buy for your project. So project-oriented stuff, that's huge, what you can and cannot share with someone.
So elaborate but carefully.
Yeah, so yesterday in our RB 3, right? And are you in our RB Africa class? No, I'm not. No, okay.
You're missing out.
But no, I mean, do you feel like that's one of the things that kind of, because that group leadership thing, the case that we had to read for yesterday, it's really cool. It's actually almost exactly what you were talking about at the beginning of your lunch with us. That like group leadership, like sharing information and the whole case study. Do you guys feel like, because it's kind of the opposite of what Bryce, what he's saying, right? Do you guys think?
You know what I think? I think like it's the whole elder thing, right? So he gave a proverb that yesterday, and he said that I mean, I know it's in my language, so I'm trying to change it. The way he said it was like, so a child can have so many clothes, but he can never have as many rags as a grown-up.
Yeah, it was like, you can have the elder can have just as many clothes as the child, but the elder has a lot more rags.
It has a lot more rags, right? Yeah. So it kind of like translates to the fact that it's all a thing of experience, right? People kind of think that, okay, the older you are, or the higher you are in the organization, you have more knowledge, right? And if it's a given, it's an expectation. And if you don't have more knowledge than the next man, then you do not merit to be the president, an elder, the CEO, so people do tend to hold information a lot, because they want to believe that if you know more than I do, then you probably wouldn't respect me anymore. Because respect actually goes around information. So probably most times when you're looking for a leader, you're looking for a man who can keep short, or a woman who doesn't talk like too much details.
And in that example, I think is interesting because what you have then is that proverb is sort of it's talking about life experience, is the way I hear it anyway. And what you have is really over just a course of like 50, 100 years, that's a more basic sort of life concept that would have been much more applicable in, let's say, like a more village setting that's transferring to an organizational business setting. It doesn't translate that great because, in business, it doesn't really matter how much life experience you have. It matters how effective you are doing your business. And you also, I think, you see some of those dynamics changing. I'm not sure exactly what countries, but let's like Asia right now has that same dynamic. Elders are very respected, but business you see more and more being dominated by sort of the young, dynamic people, and so respect is shifting a little bit along those lines when you're in the business environment.
Yeah, but even with that, as a young person, you have to earn the respect.
Yeah.
Because if I go back to Ghana right now and I have to, take up a role, the fact that I'm younger, I would have to earn the respect. I can't just go and expect that because I have an MBA, I have an MD, so everyone will bow down to me.
Yeah.
So it's more, as you said earlier, it's more of a relationship thing. The people trust you, you can be trusted. You won't just take them for granted. So, and one thing I like to talk about is a bit about the culture. The culture is one that is really based on trust first. And then if you lose the trust, it's very difficult to get it back. So that's more or less the thing.
I also think that the volume of the information and why people sometimes are not willing to tell everything is linked to the context, to the environment, and to the history of the organization. For example, when I was doing a research in human resources, I spent an internship in a company that was, well, a former public company that became privatized after the structural adjustment plan. And in order to submit my report, I need to learn more about what really happened in the organization. And people were not willing to tell everything. And they were not willing to tell everything, not because they wanted more power, not because they believed in the power of the chip, but because they were scared. Because during the vaccine, there were a lot of very tough events that happened, and there were a lot of conflict in the organization. So people were scared that telling everything could put themselves in the line and they could get fired. So for example, when I was meeting with people, they were not willing for to happen. They always asked me, I hope you're not taking my name first. And they were also, and sometimes you have to, it's like you have to sometimes play the game in the sense that you have to try to learn what the people really want. If, for example, the person is someone who's 45 years old, the person is going to believe, if the person can look at you as his child, the person is more willing to give information. If the person is from their tribe, for example, if you can relate to that person in terms of speaking the same language that maybe the landless can understand, then he's willing to give you the information. So the content is very important. And when you talk to them, some of them were almost crying when they were talking. So that's something, and they are not willing to do that in front of everybody. So the content is very important in terms of information. And when you come to data collection information in terms of the whole country, the problem with Africa is that a lot of activities are in the informal sector. And as long as those activities are in the informal sector, it's difficult for companies like Bloomberg or Euromonitor to really collect information because nobody's going to really tell you how much they are earning. And even sometimes people don't even tell the members of the family how much they are earning. So they cannot tell you someone who is stranger how much they are earning, how much they are losing per month. So it's very bad.
One of the most extreme examples of that we encountered not in Africa, in Guatemala, which has really become notorious for kidnappings. And nobody who owns a business there is going to tell you how much money they make, and they're always going to say it's almost nothing, because if they make a lot of money, all of a sudden they're a target, getting kidnapped and extorted for ransom. And you mentioned, Cedric?
Yeah.
You mentioned structural adjustment, so this is like one of the, what country are you from?
Cameroon. So in the early 1990s, our country was almost defaulted on our loan. And we had to require the help of the IMF. So we signed a social adjustment plan, and as part of the plan, the government had to privatize some companies, and during those privatizations, some people had to let go. So when I was doing my master's in human resource management, I was interested by one company in particular, which I was trying to look at the value system between the value system when the company is governed by the government, it's managed by the government, and the value system when the company is managed by a private entity. And so that's where I have to do research. But it's in a lot of African countries, especially sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the countries they have to follow the social adjustment plan, so they have to, and that's one reason why the informal sector was has developed so far, because prior to the 1990s, most of the people were hired by the government. And when it was, because after the independence, the government was a safe bet for everybody. So if you wanted to be successful, you had to work for the government. And when the crisis happened, a lot of people were fired by the government. So they had to survive.
That's still the case, though. Many African governments are the biggest employer in their country.
Yes, it's a case by case. It depends on the relationship and the contact with the IMF and all that. Countries who shall sometimes see as best student of the IMF World Bank, usually you will see that it's an important increase in the share of people, number of people who are employed by the government compared to the years after the independence.
I think what you're talking about too is really important for a lot of us who are not from Africa, as well as understanding that context of why people may or may not be telling you things. That there's so many undercurrents that you may not really understand. You got to understand it. Maybe you're from there, and maybe we're able to speak with some people sort of offline and get their reactions. But you may never know what's going on with people, and even if people do kind of open up to you, you don't know what kind of backlash may come their way. As secretive or whatever you try to do with your information, especially in these high context cultures, I find that there's a lot going on there that I can't really put my eyes on.
And even after just a short period of time, if they're going to continue to be there after that. Just a quick question. Everybody's been talking about building trust and relationships. In your experience, the projects you've worked in, what's the most effective way to do that in 6 weeks? How do you build trust in 6 weeks? Quickly.
Drinking alcohol?
It's a technique I have used.
That works everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good question because, okay, the reality is in 5 or 6 weeks, well, you're really, I don't want to say you can't, but you're limited in how much you can build that. But you spend the time, whether it's over alcohol or coffee or tea, and in dinner, and in the homes and things. You do have to demonstrate competency, that expertise, for sure. And you also have to demonstrate, especially as a foreigner, that you can sort of take it like in that culture. This is, I wasn't even going to mention, but you brought it up. I think it may have to do with that building trust in a short amount of time. Especially if you're a foreigner, people know that you're way out of your comfort zone. They know. And they know that their culture is very different, and they're going to see how you react to it. Am I fairly accurate? If you're like just wide-eyed and like the naked kids running around and got your video camera out like the tourists, you're not building credibility, right? And I really try. You all know exactly what I'm talking about.
On our Kenya travel.
Yeah. If you demonstrate that like you can take this in stride, or that you have experience there before, even if you don't have experience, if you can kind of fake it. I know it's hard for people because I know a lot of our teams go over and I see them, with the video cameras, like I'm doing this stuff. I'm like, no, don't do that. I mean, one guy, bless his heart, went to.
Whenever you preface something that bless his heart.
He went to, and this is not even one you know, this has been several years, but he went to Cambodia of all places, which is not that poor relative to a lot of other places in the world. And one of his first blog posts is like, one of the first things I noticed is just how poor everyone is. It's like, really? I mean, that's all you're sort of seeing here. So you have to be able to sort of walk the walk a little bit. And for me, I don't want to talk too much about the Peace Corps because that's sort of pre-MBA. But that 2 years there, living at a basic level is really a unique experience. At this point in your career, as a lot of you guys, you can't really go back and do that. You can't just put your career on hold, or you have other responsibilities. But it allowed me, years later, when I went into Ethiopia, a small village, to work with this Millennium Villages project, I kind of feel like I was going home. I was completely comfortable in this sort of two-street town in the northern part of Ethiopia. No running water or toilet. Anyway. You know what I mean? So to be able to adapt and be authentic with people, and with always acknowledging that it's not your culture, and you may not ever understand it, but you're still comfortable in it, and you understand there are differences, but you're open to those differences, and you still try to meet people on a personal level. Does that resonate? That makes sense?
And
not take things personally.
Mm.
Really like
Oh, yeah.
detach, like that's like survival. You have to be in survival mode.
That's very
Just
true.
really detach yourself a little bit. You know, like keep a sense of humor for everything.
That's
Just
really
roll with it,
important.
like-
Yeah, it's extremely important.
Really important.
Flexibility and these sort of uncertain things, and kind of taking it with a sense of humor. And that's how people, that's how, I think that's how Africans sort of manage things too. I mean, there is so much, there's so much need. There could be, you know, the problems are like, say from a business point of view, you know, the voids are so deep. It can be pretty intense, but there's still a very, there's still a very social and humorous, happy aspect to things.
From your own experience and from the lessons you guys have learned during the debriefing of your teams in Africa, what do you think, what do you think Africans or African leaders need to do in order to kind of ignite the economic development of the country?
Oh, Peter, that's a huge question. First, I would say that the African culture, in my opinion, produces some really amazing leaders. You know, more than we see in other cultures. I had a friend. I don't know too deep in the story, but I had a friend. My friend dated this guy in the Peace Corps, and he was a Vietnamese guy. And she was asking about this new boyfriend she has here in the U.S. And we were talking about comparing him to Kudus, who's the guy who's been in. And Kudus, she asked him about her new boyfriend, which is this sort of slight, you know, white guy who lives in Brooklyn. And I said, well, you know, Margie, it is different for you because, you know, Kudus, and they were really in love. This was a serious relationship. I said, Kudus, and I said, I've never said this about anyone. And I said, more than anyone I've ever known, Kudus was a man. Like, he was a guy, like, very quiet, but like if there was like a bar fight or something, he wouldn't even involve people who would look to him to resolve it. And he just sort of like, this is what's going to happen. You know? But an incredibly gentle guy. He worked with kids. He was on the national basketball team and gave his life back to the children like that. So I think you have the leadership capacity. I think, you know, I mean, there are obviously you know, the leader, the high-level leader stage. You know, yeah, you do have a lot of corruption, power corrupts. But I also think you have a lot of pretty magnanimous leaders there. You know, there's always questions. I mean, a guy like Paul Kagame, you look to him and say, well, you know, he's done a pretty good job. The guy who wanted. There's also serious questions about a guy like Paul Kagame that I don't really know the details. But, you know, there's a lot of like political repression rumors and whatever.
We were talking about with Bridge to Rwanda tonight. It was a very interesting conversation.
Someone experiencing the same things.
Well, someone came the other day from Bridge to Rwanda, and he was talking about that, and he was talking about how, you know, they brought everybody together and it's all great. You were there. And I was watching her out of the corner of my eyes to see, because I know her, you know, to see how she was reacting to some of these things, and I could see some, you know, and there's so many layers in that situation. It was very interesting to hear his perception of, oh, everything's great, it's da, 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 and then go back later and look more into it and realize, well, there's some stuff boiling under the surface still, but it's definitely two sides of the same coin, that layer. Very interesting.
Or maybe more sides.
I was just say it's interesting listening to the, you know, we here at Thunderbird you bop around from different regions and continents and all that, but hearing like Africa's issues or, you know, what they excel at or what they fall down in. But it's like, it's humanity, you know, when you go power struggles, envy, jealousy, you know, the collection of power, the distribution of information. These are
All over the world.
world over. I mean, it's kind of the only thing I joke that Thunderbird doesn't teach is power politics in the real world. And you're like, cross-cultural communication and all the above, but then you're like, there's a village elder here and he's corrupt. And you're like, that's mostly everywhere. You know, like, but it's some of it's a little more flagrant or more, you know, like a relationship-based society. We joke that I mean, it's, you almost downplay the West or something, it's not as much stuff, which it may or may not be, maybe more transparent, maybe more meritocracy, but it's the world. And I think it's interesting to see in Africa too. That's something we don't discuss, that Chicago and LA aren't also run by a cabal of powerful men and women, you know, but it's interesting to hear. But in Africa, I think it's intense, but life is relationships.
And the power is very real. You know, I think the U.S. really is an anomaly. It's like we elect a president and they just sort of hand it over every 4 or 8 years. It's ridiculous. You know, power in a lot of cases is influence and it's relationships you have and how you can, who's really gonna, break when it comes down to it, who's gonna side with you, who's not. And that's based on, fear, perception, a lot of different things. It's power, and it's a very real thing. In the U.S., I think exchanging that power is very odd, actually. And we try to impose that around the world. I want to take a stab, at that question, because it's a broad question. There's so many issues, but I think when you have those leaders, they need to lead by example and walk the walk. That corruption at a very high level, kind of like in a lot of countries, corruption, people can't stand the traffic guard, but the guy who pulls you over on the side of the road and demands a little bit here and there, especially on Fridays and the weekends coming up, people hate that person. But when the president's stealing, in the billions, it's like, you don't see that as much. But I do think that sort of example at the top sort of breeds like disenfranchisement, disengagement, and this sort of like, it's always going to be like that. We never get ahead. And I've seen that up close and personal, let's say like the local level with like the mayor and the way they treated people around the local environment. I think you really got to walk the walk. And I mentioned Ghana, I'm kind of hard pressed, and I haven't been as immersed. Some of you may be more than me recently anyway, in sort of politics on the continent. And I'm not sure if there are people who are walking the walk right now. I'm not sure who to point out.
Maybe you guys have some suggestions?
For people,
Good leaders?
People who may be kind of walking the walk. I mean, I think maybe Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in Liberia does pretty decent. There's always questions, but
I think there's the new Senegalese president, Macky Sall. It's kind of very effective. After taking the power, he asked for an audit of the different ministry, different companies, and trying to fight corruption. So for example, he put the son of the former president here because he was allegedly in presence of money.
And people who are maybe in like the opposition parties may be like good with leadership until they get the power. Then things change. Yeah.
Again, I think that's what that happens everywhere. I mean, like just listening to you guys talk about Africa, like you can apply every single subject you guys have spoken about here to Brazil. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
So it's just, to me, it's just really interesting.
It's cool. It's a small world, right?
Yeah.
It's like an equal sentence. It takes wild leadership to voluntarily step down or not amass more power or buy a nicer whatever. But it also makes you weaker in your opponent's eyes when you do step forward. You're like, might have to shoot back at the 2x4.
well, and there's no guarantee that the next guy, even if you voluntarily step down, set this great example, no guarantee the next guy's not going to be worse. Do something worse. Ghana's done a pretty decent job of it, I think, of handling elections, right? They've been doing it. I haven't looked at it recently, it's always a challenge. I mean,
There's also
Now, get out of here.
Oh my goodness.
Paul B has been there for 20-some years.
peace and stability.
All right, guys, pre-lunch. We don't have to stop talking, but I'm going to officially end the session just because it's about 2:20, I think. And I know that some people got a class in 20 minutes or 10 minutes or tomorrow. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I don't know when you guys have class, but it is 2:20 something. Maybe we didn't clap. Go ahead. Have a little ABC gift for you. So thank you, sir, for coming. You've lived in different countries, right? You're allowed to drink in the ocean.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's like talking about something that's bad.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you guys, this was great. I really appreciate you all coming out and participating. I hope this was useful. I've got so much more stuff here. We can do this again if we want to, or just set up a thing, but I had a lot of fun too. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like really happy we have a good like 50% new people every week, which is really cool. I don't know, I'm really impressed with everybody. Yay! I mean, the people that are here every week, thank you for coming back over and over again, but the new people, welcome.
No, it's good. This is, you know, I consider this an extra hour and a half of class that I get every
Yeah.
Free, that's
For
it.
free. So
Ah, you
the
got it.
only thing fun to bring
You
is
got
for
it.
free.
Yeah, I mean,
Got it.
You just said it's good, my friends said
I've got signature on the lease.
actually been to a lot of speakers at this school. And honestly, I really
Telling you. You gotta watch House of Cards.
The price?
And then all that stuff Matt was talking about comes in at night.
That's why I keep the housing things on. But yeah, I have since Friday,
Every week I'm getting a little bit more.